So you wrote about what I had not heard this term before, but Wexit in your
Yes.
book.
Yeah.
So that would be the separation of the Western provinces. Um, I have a bunch of questions about this, but one of my first
Yeah.
questions was that I just don't see BC leaving. Like I can see why Alberta should separate, and I think Alberta should separate. I think that it would be better for Alberta for sure. And then that
Yeah.
maybe, Saskatchewan would follow, but BC is still voting NDP, and I don't know that they would be on board. What do you think?
Right. Well, I lived for a short period of time in Victoria, BC, and I'm very familiar with the, I don't know, crunchy hipster culture, if you can call it that, of coastal BC. Now, so the book is financial sovereignty for Canadians, Untether Yourself from the Ottawa Leviathan, and I sought to really give Canadians options for taking personal action to put to extract themselves from Ottawa, whether it's leaving the country or using cryptocurrencies or using private or censorship-resistant platforms. Now, in the epilogue, I thought I could add a bit more flair and say, well, the real untethering would be just a whole province to leave, right? Now, I know that you would get probably, I don't know, 5% of the British Columbia population voting to secede from Canada right now. And you'd probably get 35, maybe even 40% right now in Alberta, right? So given the latest impetus, who knows? But my sense is that if Alberta were to leave Canada, the country would nigh be over, in that it would be fiscally unsustainable, even less than it is right now, right? So, or even more unsustainable than it is right now. And how that would finish up, I'm really not sure. It's just clear that Canada has become so dependent on Alberta's revenues that she would not know how to handle living without it. And so if Alberta were to leave, and I'm optimistic, I don't think it'll happen next year, but within the next decade or so, I think it will happen. That would, in my opinion, be the end of Quebec's presence in Canada, because there'd no longer be bribes or subsidies to keep them in.
Mm.
And then once that happened, you have such a fragmented country. I'm thinking, why would you even have Canada together? It wouldn't make a lot of sense, because Ottawa is so far from Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe Vancouver would want to just be its own country too. I don't know. But Wexit is just a broad term referring to the departure of the Western provinces. It doesn't maybe Manitoba would want to stay in, maybe BC would too, but predictably Alberta would go first. And there's a strong view that Saskatchewan would join Alberta, and that would make maybe a new country called Buffalo. Yeah.
Cool. I'd love to see it. I'm
Yeah.
curious to know exactly how that would work, though. I mean, is it so you would hold Alberta's talking about holding a referendum.
Yes.
Danielle Smith has just made it easier to hold a referendum. And then what? I mean, is it possible that the Canadian government could just say, no, you can't leave? I mean, I just saw a clip from one of the Indigenous chiefs saying that,
Yeah. Yeah.
you can't go, we own this land essentially, which, what did she say? If they're not happy living in this country, anybody who wants to separate, the premier included, they can gladly go live in any other country they wish around the world, but they will not be taking any treaty or inherent lands away with them. So can Indigenous people sort of hold provinces hostage on account of reserve land?
Yeah. So Megan, I'm really glad you brought this up, because these sort of silly arguments are everywhere. And there's so many responses to them. So first, Canada obviously has decentralized away from the United Kingdom, right? We're not represented by the British Parliament. And is that evil? Is that unpatriotic? And also, it wasn't as though the area now known as Alberta was voluntarily annexed to Canada. It was forcefully annexed. So they don't. It wasn't like all the Albertans at the time said, "Let's have a vote and join Canada," right? It didn't happen like that. So this and I just don't. I mean, in many ways, it's a bit of a tragedy that as you get older, we become a bit more cynical, maybe, you know.
It's happened to me.
And so you see that the people who resist things like Alberta separation or independence tend to be those who receive the most subsidies from the federal government, right? Yeah. So it's not an accident that Edmonton, right, where there is the political class of people, they're most opposed to it. And we know that there's this indigenous industry now, unfortunately, this kind of victim industry where not everyone who claims First Nation status gets this, but the higher ups, they do. They're dependent. They've been bought off basically de facto through the welfare system that's provided to them. And so they're probably concerned that Albertans won't be so easily manipulatable to that sort of guilt shaming that supposedly they have to just pay reparations forever, basically. So I just think that in Canada, everyone gets a vote. You don't get more votes because you're First Nation, you know, First Nation status. And within Alberta, there'll be a referendum in the next few years. And First Nation people who are also Canadian citizens can get a vote too. Now, like I said, my sense is many of them have enjoyed preferential treatment from Ottawa as a way to make them more subservient, and maybe they're afraid of getting just equal treatment before the law or under the law in an independent Alberta, but then they can get a vote. I mean, that's one of the real tragedies, that Ottawa has bought off various constituencies, including industry, higher education, now the media, and so these various sectors are afraid to bite the hand that feeds them. It's really a tragedy. It's so destructive to intellectual integrity. So I should respond more about in terms of the process, right? My personal view, and it is a view shared by Michael Wagner, the author of this book, No Other Option, right? It's just about leaving Canada, is that you don't need any kind of permission or approval from Ottawa. You can just do it yourself, which is what Quebec planned to do back in the 90s with the 1995 referendum, with which they came very close, right? However, after that, I think Ottawa, they became concerned about it and put a process in place. So it's called the Clarity Act. So on the one hand, they affirmed that it is completely legal or constitutional for provinces to secede from Canada. On the other, they put some stumbling blocks, which I guess most separatists have accepted now, that there has to be some kind of a negotiation with Ottawa, and how that would proceed, it's really an unknown because it hasn't happened yet. But in terms of people being bought off, this is just, it breaks my heart to see how, and I have friends who are stuck in the situation, how so many Canadians are dependent on government, and they basically are afraid because they know if they had to get a real job, their salaries or benefits would go down tremendously. So they really have become stuck in their roles. And it's a bit like asking people who are dependent on the welfare state or on government employment, it's a bit like ever expecting government or public school teachers to be libertarian. It just is never going to happen, right? Because they are dependent. They're basically working for this entity that they have, I guess, positive feelings towards, and they are not going to vote against their own self-interest, right? Now, this is a problem too, because as you said, immigrants tend to move to the cities, and they typically do not have the heartland, rugged individualist mentality of native Albertans. So if you were to remove Calgary and definitely Edmonton, you'd have separatism tomorrow, basically, right? All the rural Albertans would support it right away. you are stuck with now these urban populations that don't reflect traditional Alberta. And this is an issue that is especially sensitive to me because I'm of the pioneer stock, similar British pioneer stock in New Zealand, and my mother's family were not, I don't know, pioneers, but of immigrants from generations ago to Alberta. So there is a particular culture. I mean, what's the point of separating and having independent Alberta unless it is distinct? And of course it is distinct. Alberta is distinct, but that distinctiveness is diluted with time the more you have immigrants go there. And unfortunately, I suspect politicians, it's almost like CEOs wanting to grow their companies. Politicians want to feel more powerful and have a bigger population under them. And I would caution people that you don't want to dilute the very distinctiveness that makes Alberta worth separating for.